Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be building a Jamstack website using Hugo, Netlify CMS, and Zapier, and I'll show you how to deploy it to Netlify. This video is a screencast based upon an article that I've written over at howtocode.io, and this is the article right here, Understanding the Jamstack. So if you're looking for written instructions, this article will go in detail of everything that I'm going to cover in the video, including all the links, all the commands I type, and then screenshots of everything that I'm doing. So the first thing we need to do is we need to install Hugo. So if you go to the website, go hugo.io and go to the Getting Started section over here on the left, then there's a Install Hugo link. It's really simple to install depending on whatever operating system you're on, so just follow along with the links. They're all here. I personally am on a Mac, so I already have it installed. I used Homebrew, and I highly recommend you use Homebrew too if you're using a Mac. So I've got my terminal open here. I'm just in a projects folder and then the screencast, so if you look, it's just an empty directory. There's nothing inside of here. So the first thing we need to do now that we've got Hugo installed, which we can confirm if we just type in Hugo --help, you should get an output similar to this. So Hugo's all set and running. So let's first create our new site. So we type in Hugo new site, and I'm just going to call it blog, and that's it. It's pretty quick. So if now we have a blog directory, let's cd into that, and here's our site. So the next thing we need to do is to install a theme, and for this screencast I'm going to be using a theme called Ink. So back at the top of the Hugo website, you can go to this themes link, and I'm just going to search on the page for something called Ink and just do Command F. And this is the theme that I'm after, we're going to use. So here it is. We can download it, and this is going to open up to their GitHub repo. So I'm just going to code and then do download zip, and now it's going to download all this code from their repo into a zip file. Let's go back over here. So if I'm back in I downloaded it earlier, you should download it, and it'll be called, when you unzip it, it's going to be called Hugo Ink Master, and you just need to rename it to Ink. And then in another folder over here, this is the new blog that I just created with Hugo down in my projects screencast directory. So this is what Hugo creates when we run that Hugo new site command, and in here is where we're going to put our theme in this themes directory. So if I just copy this, paste this here. Now if we go back, you've got our Hugo build, and then we've got Ink down here. So the next thing we want to do is this Ink theme comes with some example data, and if you go in here under our Ink theme, there's this folder called example site. So we're going to just going to expand this down, and these directory archetypes, content data, you'll see that we've got it up here in our main Hugo build, archetypes, content data. We're going to take all of this, and we're just going to drag it back out to the root. So it's going to ask if I want to replace it, so I hit apply to all, replace. So now these archetypes, data, and content, this is coming from within that example site. So now all that stuff is empty. So if we go back over to our terminal, we can do Hugo serve, and this will spin up a little web server for us. And if we go to localhost 1313, now we see our Hugo site and our theme all set up. Now I have dark mode preference on my Mac, so this is going to appear in dark mode. Yours might be with a white background and a little bit of a different theme. It's kind of dependent upon how you have things set up in your system preferences. So another thing I want to show you is let's learn how to create our own post with Hugo. So you can do that easily with a simple command called Hugo new posts, my first post .md. So we're doing Hugo new, and then this is our post directory, and then this is the file name that we want to give it. We hit enter, and then this is the file that got created. So if we open up our text editor and we go to content, posts, and then you'll see my first post. All these down here are ones that we copied over from that example site from the ink theme. And so up here at the top, this is what is called known as front matter. And this is just basically data that we can use, that Hugo uses in order to inject data in various different places. So the first thing I want to do is I want to actually go into one of the posts that Ink gave us, one of these example posts here, and I'm going to copy their data, their front matter, and I'm just going to replace the inside of the post that we just created. And then I'll just give it a different name, my first post. I will delete this, and let's see, what's today? December 29th, 2020, so I'll just do. And for the description, I'll just do this is the description of my first post. Okay. And for tags, I'm just going to leave these as is. And here we can just put some text. Okay. So if you go back to our terminal and run Hugo serve again, open up our site localhost 1313. And so here's our post. I made a little typo. That's okay. So here's our date. Here's our post. Here's the description. And if we go inside, here's our, which will be like our body content. And then here is our tags. Okay, so now that we've learned how to create a post in Hugo and our theme is all set and running, the next thing we want to do is we're going to publish this to GitHub. That way we can set up Netlify to deploy our site. Head over to github.com and create a free account. And once you've created an account, you're going to click on this plus button up here, and you're going to go to new repository, and you're going to give it a name. I'm just going to call this one Hugo blog. You can make yours public or private. I'll just make mine private for the sake of this demonstration. And then we're going to create the repository. Cool. We're going to scroll down a little bit, and we want to go to the line that says to push an existing repository, and I'm just going to copy this remote URL. And so then we're going to head back over to our terminal, and I haven't initiated a new Git repository in our blog, so make sure that you're actually in the blog folder on your terminal, and we're going to do git init. So now we've got Git enabled. We're going to do git add dot. That'll add all of our files, so that way when we do a status, this is all the things that are staged to be commit. We're going to do git commit -m init commit. Then we are going to paste in that URL that we got from GitHub for our repo and hit enter, and then we can do git push -u origin master. Okay, looks good. Go back to GitHub, and if we refresh, now our code is up on GitHub. Okay, so now that we've got our code up on GitHub, we need to set up our account on Netlify so that we can deploy our Hugo site and get it live. So if you go to netlify.com, you can just sign up for a free account, and once you sign up and you log in, you're going to be taken to a dashboard similar to this. I already have a couple sites up here, but what you want to do is click on New Site from Git, and it's going to ask us to connect. So we click on GitHub, and you can search in here, so just Hugo blog. And so here's our site that we just made. Click on that. And then Netlify is pretty smart. It knows that we're using a Hugo site, and so it fills out the branch name to deploy, which is master, the build command is Hugo, and the directory is public. So just hit deploy site. and now the deploy is in progress. So after a couple of seconds, probably less than a minute, Netlify should have deployed everything. So if we click on this link, open in a new tab, we get this. So here's our website, but it looks like things are broken, right? Like our CSS clearly is not being loaded. And if we open up our DevTools, we see that we've got some issues here. We've got some mixed content warnings, and we've also got, it looks like it's trying to load a script from http://example.org JS So we need to find out why our site is loading from example.org. So in order to fix this, we head back over to our code here, and inside of this config.toml, this is basically just a big configuration file that Hugo uses to basically populate a bunch of data specifically to this theme. So I'm not going to go over everything in here. You can take the time to look at it, but you can essentially populate a bunch of variables and data, and then Hugo, you can use these variables all throughout your website. So by default, our base URL is http example.org. This is the problem. So if we just erase this and put a / and save it, now if we go back to our terminal and let's push up this change, so we'll git add, git commit, give it a message, fixed base URL in config.toml, and let's push it up. Sorry, just so you know, I have some aliases for git, and it's kind of just muscle memory. GP just means the same thing as doing a git push. So now that we've got that pushed up, if we head back over to Netlify, every time we make a push to master, it's going to deploy again. So you can see it's triggered another build just by pushing to GitHub. GitHub fires off a hook, and Netlify picks it up, and then it starts building again. Okay, so now that our latest build has been published, if we go back over to our site, refresh the page, and now everything's back to normal. And here's our post, and everything looks good. Okay, so now that we've got our site up and running on Netlify, we're going to now install Netlify CMS, which if you go to netlifycms.org, this will allow us to, it basically gives us a flat file CMS, and it's a really handy way of having a CMS for static sites. So this is something that Netlify built, open sourced it, and gave it to the community, because content management can be a little tricky when you're dealing with static sites, unless you want to use like a headless CMS or something like this. So head on over to netlifycms.org and go over to their docs, and then over in this add to your site section, these are basically all of the instructions and details that I'm going to be covering right now in this screencast of how to install and get this set up on your machine and on our Hugo website. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create some files and folders within our Hugo blog for our Netlify CMS. So if we head back over to our code, and let's just minimize everything. We need to go into, as you can see in our documentation, we need to create an admin folder, and because we're using Hugo, that's going to live inside of the static folder. So if you go over here to static, you can right click and just do new folder called admin, and we're going to create two new files inside of admin. We're going to create a index.html, and we're going to create a config.yaml file. Head back over to the docs. And so here's the two files that we create. And so within our index, we're going to copy this section right here. This is what needs to go into our index.html, this code. So let's go back to our text editor, index, paste that in there, go back to the docs, and then scroll down a little further. And then inside of our config.yaml, we're going to paste this code here. Okay, so now that we've got our config.yaml set up, the next thing we want to do is install what's known as collections. So you scroll down here to this section in the documentation to the collections. So essentially what collections are, this is the way that Netlify CMS knows about the content and the structure of our content. So if you can see here, we've got the name blog. This is just an example. And then we've got our fields down here. Again, and all these different fields are laid out in the documentation. So we need to tell it, like, for instance, we've got a title, we've got a date, we've got our body, we've got tags, all that different kind of stuff. So everything that we want to be able to update and manipulate in the CMS, we need to tell Netlify CMS about. So what we're going to do is you come back over to the article here, and we scroll down to the collections. Okay. This code right here is what we need specifically to our blog. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, and then I'm going to explain everything that's going on. So in our config.yaml, we're just going to put this on a new line here and just paste that in. So essentially what this is doing, this is allowing Netlify CMS to know about our specific content. So we've got posts, so here's our name, and we've got it giving it a label, and the folder in which this content lives is content posts, which is here, content posts. And this create true essentially will allow users in the CMS to create new posts via the CMS. And then we've got our fields down here. And so in our fields, if you noticed, let's just open up real quick. Like an example post, these would be our fields. Like we've got a title field, a date field, a description field, and then we've got tags. So within our fields, we've got a title, our published date, our description, our body, and our tags and categories. This post doesn't have categories, but you can add them if you'd like. And so you can see that our titles is a string type, our published date is a datetime type, label is text, the body is markdown type, and then these tags are lists, which is, you can think of it very similar to an array. So now that we've got that all set up, we've got to do one more thing. And this next thing I'm going to show you, we don't actually need specifically for this theme, but I just want to teach you and show you how to use it in case you want to use it for an actual project. And essentially we need a way to allow Netlify CMS to know where we want to store images. So in our particular theme, we're not actually using any images, but if you were using a different theme or if you wanted to update this theme to actually make use of images, we need to be able to tell Netlify CMS where to upload and save those assets. So underneath the backend, we're just going to go media folder, static images uploads, and then we're going to do public folder images uploads. So this is essentially saying our media folder is in it doesn't exist right now, but when we upload an image, it's going to go into static, and then it'll create an images folder and an uploads folder. And then the public folder, this is where they're going to be served out of, is just out of images and uploads. So you'll see this once we get inside the CMS, but this will tell Netlify CMS that if we want to update it and add images, this is where to store those images. Okay, so now with those changes in place, let's clear this a little bit, and let's add our code to Git so it gets pushed up to Netlify. So I'm going to git add git commit installed Netlify CMS git push. Okay, cool. So now with that going, if we go back to Netlify and refresh, you can see it's publishing that build right now. So while that is being deployed, the next thing we need to do is we need to set up something in Netlify that's called Netlify Identity. And what Netlify Identity is essentially a way for us to Netlify for handling authorization and authentication, because we need a way for people to sign in and log into the CMS in order to update and make changes. So within our dashboard up here, we can go to Site Settings. And then if you scroll down on the left-hand side, there's this Identity section, and we're going to enable identity. Okay, so now that we've got Netlify Identity enabled, if we scroll down here, you'll see registration is open. You can change this to invite only, and it tells you this is usually if you wanted to have like send an email invite to specific people, but just to make things simple for the sake of this demonstration, we'll just leave this as open, which should be the default. And then if we scroll down to the very bottom, we want to find something that's called Enable Git Gateway. Yes. So under here, under Services, Git Gateway. So this allows us the CMS to authenticate and connect to GitHub's API. So do Enable Git Gateway. And so here's our repository, and here's our token and everything, and we can just kind of leave that as is. So now that we've got identity set up and installed, we need to install a couple scripts on our Hugo website that'll interact with Netlify and the identity API. So if you open up our code here, actually let's go back to the documentation here. So we've already done collections. So here's the authentication section. We've already set up Netlify Identity. We've enabled Git Gateway. These are the steps we've already gone through. And so this is the part that we need to handle. So we need a way to authenticate with the API, and so they give us this handy script tag, which we just need to add to our site. And so if we copy this, this needs to go into the head section of every single page on our site. I'm sorry, not in the head of every page. It needs to go into the admin section. So if you go back to code, where we created this static admin and then index.html, in the head section, just before the closing head, we're just going to paste in that script. Now that we've got it installed here, we also need to install it across every page in our site. And the way we do that is if we go to Themes, Inc., and we go to Layouts, Partials, there's a header partial. So this is basically like a layout file that every single page within our Hugo site will inherit from. And so just above this closing head, we're going to paste that script in again. So with both of those installed, we can close this and go back to the documentation. And now we need to install this little JavaScript snippet on every page as well. So if we go back to our code, into our Themes, Inc., Partials, there's a footer. And then at the bottom of the footer, we're just going to add in this code here. So this is just a little JavaScript snippet that basically what this does is once it recognizes that Netlify Identity is enabled, it's just going to redirect us to the admin page so that we can use the actual CMS. Okay, so now that we have that installed, we need to commit our changes. So let's add them. Installed Netlify Identity and push those up. And then head back over to Netlify, go back to deploys, and we're just going to wait until this is done building. Okay, so now that our latest changes where we installed Netlify Identity are up on Netlify, what we can do now is we go to our Netlify URL, and if we go to /admin, now we're in the CMS. So now we can click on Login with Netlify Identity, and so we need to first sign up. So let's put in our name, use your actual email because you need to authenticate with your real email, and click on the link that they send you and put in our super secret password, sign up. Okay, so it sent us a confirmation email. So let me open that up. So here's the email. Confirm my email. Okay, now I'm logged in. This is in a different browser, so let me go back here. Let's close out of this. Let's refresh this. Log in. So put in our email. Log in, password. And so now we're inside of Netlify CMS. And so you can see here's all our posts. And here's our first post. So we can click on it. And so those collections, let me just quickly go back here. In our config.yaml, these collections right here, these fields map to these fields here. So here's our title, our publish date, which because it's a date time will give us a date picker, our description, and here's our body text, and then we can add tags. So then if we make a change here, so I made a typo, so let's just call it my first post and give it an exclamation point. If we hit publish here, we'll do publish now. What this will do is it will automatically make a git commit to Git, save those changes, and then it'll also fire a Git hook. So if I go back to my code here to show you how this works, if I do git status, I can do a git pull, and so now you can see it did a git pull because I changed the title. So that's another thing to keep in mind too, a kind of like a gotcha. If you're making changes both locally and within the CMS itself, always make sure that if you make a change in the CMS, you come back to your code and in your terminal and you do a git pull to make sure you've got the latest changes up in your Git repository back on your local machine. Because every time you're making a change within the CMS is automatically creating Git commits behind the scenes. So let's see. Okay, so now it's published. So now if we go to our site again, we open it up, and now you can see the title's been updated. For this final section of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to integrate Zapier, which is an automation platform, and it basically integrates with pretty much any service or application you can think of, and it's a really cool way to kind of automate a whole bunch of workflows. And yeah, in full disclosure, I learned this little trick from Flavio Copes. So if you go to his site, this kid's unbelievable. His content's really, really good. I highly recommend you come and check out his stuff on a regular basis. But I learned this trick from this post here on how to trigger auto deploys on Netlify with Zapier. And I'm just going to kind of cover how that works in a little bit more detail on this screencast. So what we need to do, the way this is going to work, is we're going to use Zapier to send a webhook every single day to Netlify, and when Netlify receives that webhook, it's going to trigger a deploy. And so the reason why we're doing this is typically within a like a more typical content management system, let's say for example like WordPress, if you're posting on a regular basis, a lot of content creators will kind of create content in bulk or in batches, and then they'll set their publish dates in the future. So you might set this article to publish, a week from now, 3 days from now, 2 weeks from now, things like that. And typically in those CMSs, because they're being rendered on the server dynamically each time you load the page, it's going to check for the date, and then it'll only render that content if the date is actually today. But because we're using a static site, we don't have a backend checking for the date. So if we have something published in the future, these are just static files. So if the files get generated, content will be live on our site. But the cool thing about Hugo is that if we use a date that's in the future, when we actually run the Hugo build command, Hugo checks for the date, and if the date is in the future, it won't actually build the page, which is great. But the problem is, let's say we've got a post out 2 weeks from now, and we want that to be published. Well, Hugo won't build the page. So then we're going to have to remember, okay, 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have to set up myself a reminder, and then I'm going to have to go into Netlify and trigger a manual deploy. And then we'd have to do that for every single time we have a content published sometime in the future. So what Zapier will allow us to do, allow us to set dates in the future, and this way it'll trigger deploys every single day, and we won't have to remember to deploy everything. Because if it just deploys every day, it'll just deploy the same content, and then when that future date comes, it'll publish that latest article. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So what we need to do is we first need to set up our Git hook on Netlify. So if we come over to the site settings and we go to build and deploy section, we want to see where it says build hooks. We're going to do add a build hook, and we're just going to call it Zapier deploy. And we're going to deploy the master branch, and then we hit save. And so Netlify will generate and give us this URL. So this is the URL for which Zapier needs to send that webhook to. So just copy this to your clipboard. Then we're going to go over to Zapier. And if you don't have an account on Zapier already, just sign up. Again, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. So once you've got that set up on Zapier, we need to go to kind of a special link. So if you come back over to the article on how to code.io, the tutorial for this, we scroll down a little bit. Okay, and we get to the integrating Zapier section. There's a specific URL that we need under the Zapier webhook setup. And you can use this link right here. So if you open this in a new tab, let's put this all the way down here. Let me close some of these. Okay, so once we're logged in and we click on that link, we're going to be sent to this page here. And it's for this, they're called Zaps. And this is a send webhook post request on the daily schedule. So click on try it. And then here's where we're going to set everything up. So it's pretty straightforward. We're going to trigger on the weekends, yes. Choose the time of day. You can choose whatever time you want. I'm going to have it build at 9 a.m. every single day. So that means it's going to send a webhook at 9 a.m. every single day. Save that. Yeah, just hit test. This isn't going to really do anything. You just have to hit test to get to the next screen. Go to continue. And so now we do post, action event, it's a post, continue. And so here where it's asking for that URL, this is the URL we need from Netlify for our build hook. I'm going to paste that in. And then for the payload type, I just do raw, but it doesn't really matter. Don't need to give it any data. And the rest of this you can essentially just leave as is, save it and continue. And now we can do a test. Let's do test and continue. Okay, so it says a request was sent by Zapier to Netlify. So let's come back here to our deploys. And then if you look at our deploys, we see deploy triggered by hook Zapier deploy, which is the one we set up. So now with Zapier set up and configured, now every single morning at 9 o'clock a.m., Zapier is going to send this post webhook over to Netlify, and Netlify is going to build our site every single morning at 9 a.m. So this way we don't have to worry about deploying our site when we have posts in the future. And so every single morning it's just going to rebuild and deploy, and those articles that are published in the future won't get built until that day actually comes. And then when the day actually comes, it'll trigger that build at 9 a.m. in the morning, and then that new article will get published for us. So that pretty much wraps everything up, guys. Everything you need, again, is in this article. If you come back to howtocode.io and you come here to the understanding the Jamstack, this has all the instructions, all the code snippets, and all the screenshots and everything that I covered in this screencast. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or concerns, just leave some comments down below, and I'll do my best to help you out as soon as I can.